The HUD inside Kalis's visor pulsed an angry red. 10,000 min to critical! Her core temperature was dropping faster than she could climb it back. Breath fogged in jagged bursts, frosting over the inside of her helmet. Every step across the fractured ice felt like walking on the edge of a knife. The blizzard didn't howl here. It crushed, pressing sound into a suffocating blanket. Through the static shimmer of her visor display, blips of hostile signatures drew closer from three sides. Frostborn hunters, the Empire's finest, wrapped in living ice, their armor fed by the planet's own breath. They had her boxed in. Kalis limped forward, blood seeping from a torn seal in her suit, crystallizing into brittle red shards across her chest plate. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, out of sync with the blinking timer. The wind shoved her sideways, boots skidding over black ice where the surface had split weeks ago. Every muscle screamed for her to stop. Stopping meant dying. A sudden crack split the ground beneath her. The ice yawned open without warning, a jagged mouth stretching wide, swallowing snow and wind in a downward gasp. Kalis's knees buckled. She scrambled back, peering into the abyss. Deep below, in a cavern of frozen glass, a dim green light throbbed in the dark, steady, deliberate. Not mechanical. A pulse, a heart the size of a fortress, locked in crystal, beating once every few seconds as if time itself moved slower down there. Her breath hitched. She'd heard the stories. Buried titans, older than the Empire, too dangerous to kill, too powerful to leave free. She'd never believed she'd stand above one. Static hissed in her comm. A distorted voice bled through. Target in sight. Box formation. Close in. The Frostborn were almost on her. Kalis gritted her teeth, rage flaring like a match struck in a void. Her hands trembled, not from cold but from the heat climbing her veins. The bioluminescence ignited beneath her skin, veins glowing molten red through the frostbitten pallor of her face. The HUD blinked again. 8,045 min to critical! But her anger burned hotter than the timer could warn. Light poured from her body, searing through the blizzard's white haze. The ice underfoot began to hiss. Steam coiled up in ghostly ribbons. Cracks raced outward, splintering the ground into massive plates. With a guttural shout, she unleashed it all. The world around her erupted. Ice shattered, collapsing in thunderous slabs, and a storm of boiling mist swallowed the air. For an instant, the cold planet bled heat, and far below, the green light flickered and quickened. She saw movement in the depths, something vast, something that had not moved in centuries. Shadows uncoiled, curling around the frozen heart. A claw, each talon the size of a dropship, pressed against the inner wall of its prison. The Frostborn are still coming. Through the boiling haze, armored silhouettes emerged, 8 of them, their armor glistening with ice runes, their visors cold as glacier glass. They advanced in unison, weapons leveled, their breath forming perfect plumes in the storm. Kalis Veira, one of them called, amplified by the wind. Surrender. The Empress wants you intact. She laughed, raw, hollow, tasting blood in her mouth. Intact is a luxury I'm not carrying. They spread out, boots crunching in unison. The ground trembled again, not from them, but from below. Her visor dimmed briefly as something enormous shifted, displacing entire pillars of ice. A voice, not through her comms, not through the air, slipped into her head, low and ancient, coiling through her thoughts. Who scratches at my cage? She froze, eyes darting to the abyss. The green glow now pulsed fast enough to match her racing heart. You bleed fire, the voice murmured. You wake me. Her breathing turned ragged. If you can hear me, you're my only way out. A pause. Then, like a glacier groaning, the reply, out or in. The Frostborn leader took another step. Final warning. Her timer blinked. 6,003 min to critical. She had no options left that didn't end in a body bag. If you want me, she said, stepping to the very edge of the fissure, come down here and take me. Without waiting for their answer, she let the rage boil over. Light ripped from her in a blinding surge, the heat smashing against the ice's ancient bonds. The crack roared open wider, swallowing 2 of the Frostborn whole. The hiss of flash-boiling snow turned into the scream of something alive being freed. Steam blasted upward, carrying with it a stench like lightning and old blood. The armored hunters staggered back, weapons scanning the fissure's edge. What did you do? One of them barked. Kalis didn't answer because she was staring down into 2 colossal eyes opening, in the dark, each burning like an eclipse. You are not Frostborn, the voice said, deep enough to shake her bones. No, she whispered. I'm the one they couldn't kill. A sound like grinding mountains rumbled below, laughter or something close. Then you have chosen. Not life, not death. You choose war. The ground split further. One claw burst free in a spray of shattered ice, the heat from Kalis's body clinging to its crystalline armor. The Frostborn opened fire, their rounds sparking uselessly against the behemoth's hide. Kaelis stood her ground, the abyss roaring beneath her feet. She didn't know if the thing would tear her apart or shield her, but she knew one truth. Either way, she'd taken the fight some way the Frostborn couldn't control. The timer kept ticking. 5, 10, Minda critical. The cold had always been a part of Kalis's life. Not the clean cold of snowflakes on a child's tongue, but the suffocating, merciless freeze that steals breath before you can scream. She remembered the day it first became more than weather, when it became an executioner. She was 8 years old, hiding under the grated floor of her home in the mining outpost of Beir's Reach. The iron panels were slick with her own sweat despite the sub-zero air. Through the narrow gaps she could see boots, heavy, frost-crusted, moving in precise formation. The Frostborn. Her mother's voice had been the last warm thing in that room. Ooh. It rose in a desperate plea and was cut short by a sound Kaelis would never forget, the wet hiss of flesh freezing solid in an instant. Her father had charged forward, a pickaxe in hand, and vanished in a cloud of frost before he reached his target. The air filled with a brittle symphony of breaking bones and ice indistinguishable. Kaelis had pressed her face to the cold metal, fighting the scream clawing at her throat. Through the floor, she watched them line up her neighbors, one by one, their bodies flash frozen in twisted shapes, mouths still open in silent terror. The soldiers moved without urgency, like butchers working through a quota. Then the commander turned, his visor glinting in the dim light. His gaze swept the room and stopped. Kaelis had held her breath, but he didn't call her out. Instead, he looked away, issuing a single command in an inhuman, metallic tone. Burn it! She'd crawled out hours later into the skeletal remains of her home, the walls dripping with melted frost and the air thick with the smell of charred ice. Her parents were gone. The outpost was gone. All that remained was the cold. That day, the flame was born inside her. Now, years later, she was crossing the white waste toward the coordinates only she dared approach, the rumored location of the sleep vault. If the stories were true, it was where the planet itself kept its old gods locked beneath the ice. Beasts that once ruled the poles before the Frostborn came. Creatures that could tear apart a war fortress as easily as a man tears paper. Her breath fogged inside the helmet. The HUD tracked her vitals, core temperature low but holding, heart rate elevated but steady. The blizzard clawed at her from every direction, but she moved with the certainty of someone who'd walked these frozen miles in her mind 1,000 times. A crackle sounded in her ear. The encrypted channel hissed with static before resolving into a voice. Kaelis, her contact said, voice urgent. You're close. The seismic readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there is not sleeping quietly. She adjusted the gain on her receiver. That's the point. There was a pause, heavy with meaning. I know what you're planning, but I need you to understand. This thing isn't a weapon. It's a calamity. It doesn't obey. It devours. She allowed herself a thin smile. Then I'll make sure it devours the right people. That's not how this works. The voice hardened. If it chooses you as its enemy, then I'll kill it, she cut in, tone flat, final. Before it kills me. The channel went silent for a moment, as if the contact was weighing whether to argue further. Finally, the voice returned, quieter this time. You're walking into the same trap the Frostborn did a century ago. They tried to chain it. Whole regiments vanished. Kaelis scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing against the sting of ice. In the distance, she could see the faint shimmer of auroras where none should be, a sign of heat and energy leaking from, beneath the ice. Then I'll walk out where they didn't. Her contact cursed under their breath. I'll keep the channel open. Don't make me recover your body. She didn't answer. The wind was rising again, howling now, carrying with it that strange hum she'd noticed since entering this sector. It wasn't mechanical, but it wasn't natural either. It was like standing next to a colossal throat and hearing the breath pass in and out. She remembered the old miner's stories from her childhood, how the ground sometimes shivered without warning, how entire ice fields would split in perfect lines as if something beneath had stretched, how the Frostborn had built their citadels far from these areas, not out of fear, they claimed, but out of respect. Respect was just another word for fear you refused to admit. She adjusted the straps of her pack, feeling the comforting weight of the thermal charges inside. They were her fail-safe. If the creature tried to turn on her, she'd bury them in its prison and seal it for another century. But if it could be directed, if it could be made to see the Frostborn as the greater enemy, then the balance of power on. This planet would shift overnight. The ice beneath her boots groaned with a long, low moan. She stopped. closed her eyes, listened. The hum was louder now, layered with something deeper, a heartbeat. Slow, but growing stronger. Her parents' faces flashed in her mind, trapped forever in those last moments. She'd seen them every night for 2 decades. She'd hear them until she died. And if she had her way, the Frostborn would hear their own dead just as clearly. The HUD beeped softly, temperature falling again. She adjusted her route, aiming for the jagged ridge ahead. Beyond it, the coordinates awaited. Halfway up the slope, she caught movement, a dark flicker against the blinding white. She dropped into a crouch, scanning. Nothing. The wind gusted hard, pushing a veil of snow across her vision. Then she saw it again. 3 black forms sliding through the storm, low and fast. Frostborn scouts. They'd found her trail. She tightened her grip on the shock rifle slung over her shoulder. "Looks like we won't be alone for the introduction," she murmured. Her contact's voice snapped back onto the channel. "Tayless, if they get close to the vault before you." "They won't," she said, cutting them off. She could already feel the glow stirring under her skin, the first ember of heat against the biting wind. She pressed forward, each step crunching in the brittle snow. The ridge loomed higher, the hum beneath the ice pounding louder. The Frostborn were closing in. The vault was waiting. Somewhere deep inside, the flame pushed harder against the wall. She kept around it. It was almost time to burn. The ridge broke beneath Kalis's boots, revealing a steep descent into the mouth of a glacial canyon. Wind screamed through the narrow cut, carrying with it the deep, almost imperceptible hum she'd been following for hours. The coordinates pulsed on her HUD, a silent metronome counting down the distance to the vault. She slid down the slope, boots kicking loose shards of ice, and stepped into the shadow of the chasm. The light dimmed here. The storm above dulled to a muffled roar, and the air felt heavier, colder, like the planet itself was holding its breath. She followed the winding floor, weaving between jagged blue walls until the canyon narrowed to a tunnel of ice. The hum deepened, resonating through the soles of her boots. Her visor caught the first anomaly, a smear of dark red on the crystalline wall. She approached, wiping frost away with a glove. Blood, frozen in thick streaks that ran down to the tunnel floor where it pooled into a jagged trail. She followed it deeper until her light fell on shapes ahead. At first she thought they were boulders, but as she drew closer, the details sharpened. Bodies! 5 of them, scattered and broken, their suits torn open as if shredded by a storm of blades. Helmets crushed inward, spines bent at impossible angles. The ice around them was unmarked. No frostburn, no freezing damage. It wasn't the Frostborn. She crouched beside the nearest corpse, brushing snow from its insignia. Not Frostborn armor exploration suits, older model, unregistered. Scavengers, maybe. Or something worse, others like her, chasing the same myth. Their fate was laid out before her. Her gaze caught a flicker of green beneath one body's arm. She pushed the frozen limb aside and retrieved a data recorder. The casing was cracked, the playback light dim, but it still held power. She tapped it against her glove to clear the frost and pressed play. Static filled her ear, followed by a strained, rasping voice. "If you're hearing this, turn back. We thought we could bind it. We thought wrong. Don't let it see your fear. It smells it. It feeds on it." The recording cut off with a sound that could have been a scream or ice splitting under tremendous weight. Kalis stood, the device still in her hand, her breath slow and deliberate. The warning wasn't enough to deter her. If anything, it confirmed what she'd come to find, what she'd come to awaken. The hum below grew stronger, almost impatient. Her HUD chimed, drawing her attention to a flicker of movement on the edge of her display. Multiple contacts, fast-moving, closing from the rear. The IDs resolved and her jaw tightened. Frostborn! And they weren't alone. A distortion swept through her thermal imaging, like heat bleeding through a frozen lens. Then she saw it. Low, sleek shapes starting between ice pillars. Their outlines shimmered as though wrapped in a thin mist of frost. Hunter class. She knew the type. Bred in the Frostborn's breeding pits, engineered to track prey by the faintest trace of heat. Each one could cover 100 meters in seconds, tearing through armor with jaws designed to shear steel. Her HUD flashed a new timer. 6 Su MIN to Sigurkel. Between the cold eating at her body and the predators closing in, the margin for error had vanished. A Frostborn voice boomed through the tunnel, amplified by an external speaker. "Kaelis Vera, you think you're different from the others who came here." She kept moving, eyes scanning for cover. "Different," she muttered, "and still breathing." Her reply wasn't private. She toggled her comms to broadcast, letting them hear her. "That's the difference. I'm not a corpse in your snow." Laughter crackled over the channel, cold and metallic. "Not yet." A shadow streaked across the wall beside her, a hunter leaping from a pillar, claws extended. She dropped to one knee and swung her rifle up, a charged round exploding from the barrel. The boat slammed into the creature's chest, spraying shards of ice and black fluid. It screeched, skidding into a wall, but another shape was already bounding in behind it. Kalis fired again, the shock glancing off its armored skull. She pivoted, retreating deeper into the tunnel, the hum below now vibrating in her bones. The Frostborn were driving her toward the vault. Whether they knew it or not, they were playing into her hands. The air temperature dropped another degree. Her visor's frost-clear cycle struggled to keep up. Ahead, the tunnel bent sharply downward into a wide chamber. The walls were smoother here, the ice darker, laced with faint green veins of ancient mineral. At the center of the floor, a thin fissure vented slow, rhythmic plumes of steam. She stepped toward it, but a hunter landed hard between her and the vent, its eyes glowing pale blue, breath curling in thick ribbons. It lowered its head, muscles coiling to strike. Kaelis didn't back away. She could feel the heat building under her skin again, the glow seeping into her veins. Her heart pounded in her ears, and with each beat, the green veins in the ice pulsed brighter. Another voice whispered at the edge of her mind, "Not Frostborn. Not human. I smell your fire." The hunter froze, its head twitching as if hearing it too. Then, abruptly, it turned, growling at the fissure instead of her. From the crack, a slow exhale rolled out, warmer than the air around it. The steam shifted, swirling upward, and within it, Kaelis thought she saw shapes, massive, coiled, waiting. The Frostborn commander's voice came again, sharper now. "Step away from the vent, Kaelis. That's not a door you want to open." She raised her rifle, but didn't aim at the vent. Instead, she trained it on the hunter, blocking her path. "You came all this way just to watch me do it? That's loyalty." Her HUD timer blinked. SAO 4000, 3 min to critical. The glow beneath her skin flared, steam thickening into a rolling fog. The hum became a heartbeat, deep and undeniable. The hunter growled, but didn't pounce. It was listening to the same thing she was, the sound of something enormous stirring in the dark. Kaelis took another step toward the vent. "The Frostborn shouted orders!" Their voices muffled by the storm of heat and vapor rising between them. The whisper in her head came again, louder now, carrying a low amusement. "Others came before you. They feared me. You do not." She smirked, though her breath came in hard bursts. "Maybe I'm too angry to be afraid." The hunter's tail lashed once, then it bolted into the mist, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Kaelis stood over the fissure, the green veins blazing now, the steam whipping around her like a living thing. The hum had become a steady, thunderous rhythm. The vault was listening, and for the first time in centuries it was listening to someone who refused to run. The fissure beneath Kaelis widened with a deep, tearing groan, as if the planet itself had decided to split. Steam poured upward in great, roiling clouds, coating her visor in droplets that froze instantly at the edges. Her HUD screamed warnings, temperature spike, seismic instability, critical heart rate. But the Frostborn were closing in, their pale armor slicing through the mist. She had seconds before they would surround her, seconds before the hunter-class beasts found their nerve and tore her apart. Her gloved fingers tightened around the detonator in her pack. It wasn't the plan, not yet, but the vault's prison was sealed by ice that had held for centuries. She needed it open, and she needed it open now. She yanked the device free, thumbed the ignition, and hurled it into the fissure. The charge detonated with a dull underwater thump. The ice didn't just crack, it shattered, fracturing into razor-edged plates that slid away from each other like the lids of a coffin forced ajar. Heat blasted upward, knocking her back a step. The glow in her skin surged to a burning pitch, veins lighting like molten rivers beneath her armor. The ice responded to her as much as to the charge, liquefying in sheets, running off the edges into the chasm like glass melting in a furnace. Something moved in the depths. The Frostborn leader barked an order, voice muffled by the fog. "Hold position! Don't let her!" The rest was lost in the sound that followed. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't even a voice in the conventional sense. It was the grinding of mountains and the rush of a tidal wave compressed into a single pulse of air. The mist exploded outward as something massive surged upward through the opening. Nirath. Its body was a cathedral of flesh and crystal, armored in jagged plates of ice shot through with veins of bioluminescent green. Eyes like twin eclipses locked on the Frostborn first. Its arrival was instantaneous violence. One sweep of its claw crushed 3 soldiers against the wall, their armor imploding with a crunch that made Kaelis's teeth clench. A hunter! Class leapt at it, biting deep into her forelimb. Nirath didn't flinch. It simply turned its head and closed its jaws around the beast. The snap was wet and final. The Frostborn opened fire. their energy bolts flaring against its crystal hide like fireworks against the fortress wall. Neerath moved through them as though they were reeds in a stream. Every step was a death sentence. Spines driving through chests, claws tearing through torsos, tails sweeping bodies into the abyss. Kalis didn't move, watching the slaughter with the detached stillness of someone who had imagined this moment for years. The Frostborn, who had frozen her family into statues and shattered them, were finally the ones being broken. But then Neerath turned toward her, her rifle still in her hands. Instinct told her to raise it, but instinct would get her killed. The monster's gaze was unblinking, ancient, its pupils contracting to slits as it focused entirely on her. It stepped forward, the ground trembling under its weight. With a slow, deliberate motion, it lowered its head until its snout was inches from her. Its breath hit her in hot, stinking waves, blood, ozone, and the metallic tang of the ice it had crushed. And then it reached out, not physically, but into her mind. Images slammed into her vision. Not hers, the vault. Endless winters, chains made of frozen light biting into flesh. The Frostborn hammering at its body with weapons forged from the planet's own heart. Pain, centuries deep. In return, it pulled from her. She felt it rummaging through her memory, like a predator sniffing at a wound. She saw the mining outpost again, her mother's scream, her father's failed charge, the moment the ice swallowed them. Neerath pulled back slightly, eyes narrowing. Its voice slid into her mind, low and resonant. "You are weak but angry. I hear your heart beat like a storm." Kalis kept her body perfectly still. "If you can hear the storm," she said, her voice steady despite the pressure in her skull, "then help it sweep them away." The great head tilted, considering her. "Storms do not choose allies. They destroy. Then destroy the right ones," she said. Neerath's eyes shifted past her to the last Frostborn soldier still standing. With a movement so fast her eyes barely tracked it, it leapt over her, landing among them like a collapsing glacier. Screams cut short, armor snapped like brittle shells. In moments the chamber was silent except for the hiss of steam rising from the fissure. Kaelis exhaled slowly, the tension in her limbs easing just enough for her to move. She turned toward Neerath. That was when it lunged, not to kill, but to seize her rifle in its jaws. With one casual bite, it crumpled the weapon into twisted scrap and spat it onto the ice. Her muscles locked. She realized the fight might not be over. Neerath stepped forward again, lowering its head until one eye filled her vision. Its iris contracted, and she felt it again, digging through her thoughts, searching for something deeper than rage. "They chained me because I killed without pause. Why do you seek me?" Kalis's jaw clenched. "Because I can't kill them all alone." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Its gaze didn't waver. She knew the warning from the dead scavenger's recording. "Don't let it see your fear, and forced." Her pulse was slow. Neerath's breath washed over her again, hot enough to fob the inside of her visor. Others begged. "You do not. Begging's a waste of time." A sound rumbled in its chest, not laughter, but something close. "Perhaps your storm is worth riding." It pulled back, towering over her again. Around them, the mist was clearing, revealing the carnage. Frostborn bodies half buried in the slush. Their weapons scattered like children's toys. Kaelis stepped closer to the fissure, looking down into the vault's darkness. The heartbeat from below had quieted, as if the other things sleeping there were still deciding whether to follow. "Neerath, into the open." She looked up at the creature. "If you're with me, we have work to do." Neerath's eyes narrowed, the green veins in its armor pulsing once. "I am not with you, human. I am with the storm. If you stand in its path, you will be swept away like the rest." Kalis allowed herself a faint, humorless smile. "Then I'll make sure I'm running ahead of it." The creature turned toward the tunnel leading out, its massive frame barely fitting between the ice walls. With a final glance over its shoulder, it spoke in her mind one last time before moving forward. "Show me the ones you hate most. Let me taste their fear." She followed, stepping over the bodies of the Frostborn without a second glance. The cold gnawed at her again, the HUD ticking down her core temperature, but the heat radiating from Neerath's body kept her just above the fatal threshold. For the first time in her life, Kalis felt the ice itself bending to her will, not because she commanded it, but because she had unleashed something that could. And she knew as they disappeared into the storm that she'd only barely passed the first test. The storm broke just long enough for Kalis to see it, an impossible shape moving through the white void ahead, half fortress, half living creature. The living ice fortress, the Frostborn's ultimate weapon. Its body was a mountain of fused crystal and flesh, towering so high its upper battlements vanished into the swirling clouds. Rows of towers jutted from its back like jagged teeth, each one a heat siphon drawing in the warmth of everything for miles. Her HUD plummeted in warning. Core temperature 02,004 min to critical. She could feel the heat bleeding from her bones, each breath colder than the last. Even Nirath slowed, steam rising off his body in ragged plumes as the creature's aura gnawed at his core. The fortress moved with a slow, crushing inevitability, each step sinking its claws into the glacier and sending spiderweb cracks radiating outward. Around its base, frost-born warriors marched in disciplined formations, their armor gleaming with the pale fire of the siphoned heat. Above, cannons carved from ice and bone swiveled, tracking the pair. Nirath's voice slid into her mind. Its heart is not flesh. It is a crystal, frozen and burning at once. I can break it, but not as I am. Kailis's hands tightened on her belt, feeling the heat still coiled under her skin. The thought had been in her mind since she'd seen the fortress in the distance, what it would take to bring it down. Her energy could ignite Nirath's body into something the Frostborn couldn't hope to withstand. But it would burn her out in the process. They didn't have another option. The first volley came without warning. Shards of supercooled ice screamed through the air like meteors, exploding into clouds of frost that froze everything they touched. Kailis dove behind a jutting wall of ice as one slammed into the ground where she'd been standing, the shockwave rattling her teeth. Nirath roared, a sound that cracked the glacier, and leapt forward, smashing through the nearest line of soldiers. The Frostborn countered immediately. From the fortress's belly, the hunter class poured out dozens of them, their claws sparking as they hit the ice. They swarmed Nirath, climbing up his limbs, biting deep into his joints. Blood as dark as night splattered across the snow. Kailis sprinted to his side, firing her sidearm into the nearest hunter's skull. The weapon's heat was barely enough to pierce their hides, but every shot bought Nirath a fraction of space. The HUD blinked again. 2,000 meant a critical, and she knew they were already losing. We can't fight them all, she thought. No, Nirath's voice answered. We kill the heart. She glanced at the towering fortress, its central spire pulsing faintly with pale light. The heart was in there, behind meters of living ice and the coldest air on the planet. Then we finish this, she said. Nirath's eyes locked on hers. To finish it, I need all of your fire. The words hit like a physical blow. She knew what that meant. Her body wouldn't survive the transfer. She could already feel how close to collapse she was, her extremities numb, her heartbeat struggling. Giving everything meant giving the last heat in her core. The battle surged around them, but for a moment, time narrowed to just the two of them. Kailis took a breath, steadying the tremor in her voice. Ow! Nirath crouched low, lowering his head until his breath rolled over her like a furnace's exhale. Place your hands on my chest. Let the storm pass from you to me. Do not break the link until I tell you. She stepped forward, boots slipping in the slurry of melted ice and blood. The surface of his chest was a labyrinth of ridged crystal and pulsing veins, hot and cold at once. She set her palms against it. The link snapped into place instantly. Her glow surged outward, pouring from her veins into his. Heat drained from her body in a flood, and in return she felt his power slam into her mind. A storm of claws, teeth, rage, and ancient hunger. Her HUD screamed, 919 to critical. Vision tunneled, the edges dimming. Every instinct screamed to pull away, but she held on. Then, over the roar of the link, his voice came again, quieter this time. What do you want when there is no more war? The question cut through her haze. She blinked, swaying, unsure if she'd heard him right. What? Answer me, human. What is left for you, if not the fight? Her breath came in ragged bursts. A place where children can sleep and not wake to ice on their faces. There was a pause, and then a deep, resonant reply. I will remember, and I will fight. The light flared between them. Her vision went white. Nirath reared back, his entire body igniting in a blaze of molten green and crimson. The heat so intense the hunters clinging to him burst into flame before vaporizing into steam. He charged. Kailis stumbled back, knees hitting the ice as he plowed through the last Frostborn line. Soldiers melted where he passed, their armor sagging like wax. The cannons above fired again, but the bolts evaporated in a torrent of heat around him. He hit the fortress's wall with the force of an avalanche. Crystal shattered, spraying shards the size of spears across the battlefield. Nirath didn't stop. He burrowed into the creature's side, tearing a tunnel toward its core. Kailis could see the spire's light pulsing faster, panicked, as if the fortress itself realized what was coming. The ground shook violently, knocking her onto his side. She could hear the fortress screaming, a grinding, high-pitched wail that rattled every bone in her body. and then the light inside the spire flared blindingly bright before imploding in a rush of superheated steam. The cold vanished. Just like that, the air filled with a searing warmth Kaylis hadn't felt in years. Neirath emerged from the smoking ruin, his claws blackened, his armor cracked, but standing. Behind him, the living ice fortress collapsed in on itself, towers crumbling, heat siphons shattering. The Frostborn scattered in disarray, their formations broken, their lifeline gone. Kalis tried to stand, but her legs refused. Her HUD was black. No more temperature readings, no more time. She realized dimly that her visor had iced over from the inside. Neirath approached, each step deliberate, his shadow falling over her. He lowered his head until his massive eye filled her view. "You still breathe?" She forced a weak smile. "Guess I do." "Then get up. The storm is not done." He turned away, scanning the horizon where the remaining Frostborn fled into the distance. She placed one trembling hand on the ice to steady herself, every muscle screaming. Somewhere deep inside, the flame still flickered, weak but alive. Enough for one more step, enough to follow him into whatever came next. The battlefield lay silent except for the slow crackle of cooling ice. Where the living ice fortress had once loomed, there was now only a collapsed ruin, a jagged crater steaming in the bitter air. The siphons were shattered, their towers crumbled into frozen rubble. The Frostborn who survived the assault were scattering in all directions, their disciplined formations dissolved into chaos. Kaelis barely registered any of it. She was on her knees, her breath a ragged rasp, each inhale feeling like it scraped the inside of her lungs. Her limbs trembled as though her bones had turned to brittle glass. The HUD in her visor was dark. Her systems had failed completely. She couldn't tell how close she was to death, only that her heartbeat felt faint and uneven. Her last memory before darkness claimed her was Neirath's massive shadow moving toward her, his molten green eyes dimmed but still burning. When she woke, it was not to the frozen wasteland of the battlefield, but to a dim, glowing chamber. The ice walls shimmered with trapped heat, casting the space in a strange, warm light. Her armor was still on, though her helmet had been unsealed to let her breathe. She realized she was lying on a bed of thick furs. Not hers, not anything human-made. The scent of them was sharp, wild, and ancient. Slowly, she sat up. Her body protested with every movement. She could still feel the hollow ache where her energy had been poured into Neirath. The chamber's entrance was a low arch carved from the ice. Beyond it, the wind howled, carrying the voice of the storm. She moved to the threshold, leaning on the wall for support. Outside, the blizzard had returned, erasing any trace of the battlefield. But not all traces. Imprinted in the snow outside the chamber was a trail of colossal footprints, deep, deliberate, and heading due north. She followed them with her eyes until they vanished into the white horizon. North. The stories she'd heard since childhood whispered through her mind, tales of the eternal ice nest, a place where the oldest and most dangerous of the frozen titans slept. Even the Frostborn avoided it. A low crackle of static startled her. She turned to see her comms unit flicker weakly to life. The voice that came through was familiar, strained but alive. "Kalis, do you read me?" She pressed the receiver. "I'm here." A sigh of relief crackled through. "We picked up seismic readings all the way from our outpost. The fortress is gone. The Frostborn are falling back across the whole sector." "You did it!" Her gaze drifted back to the fading trail in the snow. "Not all of it," she said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then answered. "Neirath's heading north. If the stories are true, there are others like him there, bigger, older." "If they wake!" The voice on the other end grew grim. Then this was just the first battle. Kalis's fingers tightened around the comms unit. Her body still ached, her core still felt hollow, but in the emptiness there was a flicker of something sharp. Resolve. The voice continued quieter now. "Kalis, you won, but it's not over. That thing, he's not ours. We don't know what he'll do next." Her lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "I know." Another pause. "Then what will you do?" She looked out into the storm again, watching the snow swallow the last hints of the tracks. "Get ready, because the next time I face him, I'll be stronger." Static hissed briefly, then the voice came back firm and low. "You won, but it's not done." "I know," she repeated, this time with steel in her voice. "And next time, I'll be ready." She closed the channel, the comms unit going dark in her hand. Outside, the wind roared over the ice fields. Somewhere far to the north, Neirath's trail was being buried beneath the snow. But she knew it was there, just as she knew the fire inside her was far from burned out. She stepped back into the chamber, letting the glow of the ice warm her skin. She would need time to recover, time to plan, time to find the strength for what was coming, because war was not over. It had only shifted north. The storm had swallowed the battlefield weeks ago, but the stories had already taken root. Across the scattered human enclaves, whispered through static-filled comm channels and firelit gatherings in the ice tunnels, they spoke of her, the flame beneath the ice. Some told it as a warning, a woman who had awakened a monster to bring down the Frostborn and might unleash something worse next. Others told it as a call to arms, proof that even in the coldest place in the galaxy, fire could burn. Kalis heard the stories herself once, passing through a refugee camp on her way back from a supply run. She didn't linger to correct them. She didn't tell them that Nearath had left her in a half-buried ice cave, or that she had followed his trail north for a day before turning back, knowing she wasn't ready to face whatever lay ahead. Let them believe what they needed to believe. Myths were lighter to carry than truth. Still, she could feel the change in the way people looked at her now, not just with gratitude, but with calculation. There were those who wanted her strength for themselves, warlords who saw in her the power to crush rivals, factions who whispered about binding her the way the Frostborn had once tried to bind Neirath, and there were others, quieter, who wanted her dead before she could decide that humanity wasn't worth sparing. She'd lived most of her life on the edges, moving through the ice as a shadow. Now, she was a symbol. Symbols couldn't hide. The days that followed were a blur of movement, scouting routes, checking the perimeter of the outpost, listening for the first hints that the Frostborn were regrouping. But no matter how busy she kept herself, her thoughts kept circling back to Neirath and the direction he'd gone. The eternal ice nest. She'd heard those words since she was a child, always in the same hushed tone people used for the worst storms. If it was real, and she no longer doubted it was the heart of something older than the Frostborn, older than the vault she had opened, and Neirath was heading straight for it. On the seventh night, after the battle, she sat alone in the observation deck of the outpost, a cracked window looking out over the ice fields. The wind howled beyond the walls, rattling the metal frame. Her breath clouded faintly in the air, the heating systems here never quite keeping up. She pulled her jacket tighter and let her mind drift back to his voice in her head. What do you want when there is no more war? She had given him the only answer she knew, a place where children could sleep without waking, to ice on their faces. But even as she'd said it, she'd felt the weight of the unspoken truth, that such a place might never exist if she kept making choices like the one at the vault, if she kept waking things that could as easily kill her people as save them. Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't turn until the voice spoke. You know the camps are still telling your story, right? Some are even teaching the little ones to draw that red glow you've got. She looked over her shoulder. It was Raylan, one of the few from the Resistance who had known her before the vault. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes sharp but tired. They think it's over, she said. He shook his head. No! They think it's begun. He hesitated, then added, They also think you're dangerous. Good, she replied without hesitation. He raised an eyebrow. You want them afraid of you? I want them prepared for what's coming, she said, turning back to the window. The Frostborn aren't gone, and Nearath, she trailed off, watching the snow swirl in the distance. He's not finished either. Raylan stepped forward, his voice lower now. You won, Kalis, but it's not done. Whatever you woke. I know, she cut in, her tone calm but firm. And next time I'll be ready. For a long moment they just stood there, the silence filled by the wind's moan through the cracks. When he left, she stayed at the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She didn't look like the hero they talked about in the camps. Her skin was still pale from cold burns, her hair matted in places where frost had bitten through. But her eyes, they burned. She thought about the lessons she had learned in blood and steam. Power wasn't for keeping everything, but for choosing what to keep. She had chosen to save the outpost, to destroy the fortress. She had chosen to wake Neirath, knowing it might doom her later. Every choice had a price, and she'd paid it. Her voice was barely more than a whisper in the empty room. Power isn't to hold everything. It's to hold what matters. And if winning means losing yourself, then what's left better be worth living for. Her breath fobbed against the glass, fading as quickly as it came. The question lingered in her mind, heavy and sharp. If to save this world, she had to awaken something that could destroy it. Would she do it again? Her heart gave the only honest answer it could. Yes. The storm outside shifted, a break in the clouds letting through a faint wash of starlight. Far on the horizon, she thought she saw it, a faint, pulsing glow of red against the white. There, one heartbeat, and gone the next. Her hand pressed against the cold glass. Somewhere out there, Neirath was moving north, and the next chapter was already waiting for her. She turned from the window, pulling her jacket tight, and walked toward the armory. There were weapons to check, maps to mark, routes to plan. The fire inside her hadn't gone out. It had simply been banked, waiting for the right moment to flare. Outside, the storm roared on, relentless and unending. In its heart, the faint red light flickered again, then vanished, only to flare brighter on the edge of the horizon. The flame beneath the ice still burned.